In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is that hour. It is time for Ghost to Ghost. Tonight, we talk about the State Fair curse and possibly its ghosts and hauntings. Tonight, my co-sponsors tonight are Heather Lawson, case manager and podcast director.
Hello.
And Mia Kerr, our social media manager and public relations.
Hey there.
And Eric Kerr, our research manager and assistant podcast producer.
Hi.
And also tonight, our special guest will be Wayne Cadwell. So tonight, we're going to indulge into an interesting subject, okay? And this was presented to me many years ago. And, I always tell everybody, and I was writing this in one of the chapters of my books, that, when any story comes to you and it starts out with, I was told or it was said, I always cringe, because that's usually the base of most folklore and legends. And this is kind of where this ends up at, partially, okay? And we're going to talk about the State Fairgrounds, Indiana State Fairgrounds, okay? Does it have a curse or is it haunted? Well, that's a very good question. In tonight's episode, we're going to kind of look into that. Let's first talk about the curse, okay? A lot of people know two major things that happened at the fairgrounds. The one is the 63 explosion, and not a whole lot of people that are younger know that one, but most older people do. And, of course, the 2011 stage collapse during the Sugarland concert. Those are two big things. But there's actually a third one out there people don't really know about. And that happened in 1869. There was a boiler blast that killed 27 people and injured 67. At the time, it was the worst incident ever in the state of Indiana. Now, bear in mind, This is 1869. So,
right.
A company called Sinker Davis, and they were in competition with another company. And what they did, they made steam engines. And they didn't only make the steam engines, but they connected them to things. Back then, that was the power source for most of your mechanically driven items. Okay, in this particular case, they were making saws to saw wood. So basically, the actual, we'll say like a wood mill. So anyway, so long story short, they were showing their newest, greatest item, and actually it was a wood saw, steam powered, and it was told that this wood saw was making its debut, but actually they were actually testing it. And they were testing it to make sure that, at the same time, it's like killing two birds with one stone. They were displaying it and testing it at the same time. The problem is some say the boiler had too much water, some say it had too little water, but, basically it doesn't matter because it exploded. And the explosion was devastating. We were talking about a major loss of life at the time. 27 people killed, 67 injured. And so, anyway, it was very severe, okay? Now, I want to talk about the curse and the hauntings, but I want to do this at the end of the story. I want to cover the history first. So, because I think it's very, very important. And,
Sure.
I think it makes a big deal. Now, the bad thing about the boiler explosion was there's only two sources really cover it. One is the forerunner of the Indianapolis News, and, and then the other, that's the Indianapolis Journal. And the other one was the Senate Street Journal, I think was the other one. There's two papers at that time that were in competition. So, I'll correct myself as I come across that information. So, anyway, that happens, okay? And at the time, it was the biggest thing. They talked about it until Fast forward 93 years. Halloween night, 1963, the Coliseum. Now, this is originally...
Picture this.
Yeah, picture this.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Farmers Coliseum, and that's the true name of the Farmers. Was the Coliseum? Was the Farmers Coliseum? It was built in the 40s, or actually late 30s, early 40s, and was designed to be the Farmers Coliseum. Later on, Pepsi came in and talked them into making the Pepsi Coliseum. When I grew up as a child, it was the Pepsi Coliseum, and depending on who's the sponsor, depends on where it goes from there. You get this. It kind of
Let me guess, they sold Pepsi?
Yeah.
And not Coke.
That was the problem. At the time, Coke was a big thing on the fairgrounds.
Yeah.
And Pepsi wanted that market share.
So
they moved in and said, hey, we'll sponsor the Coliseum. And they had a big sign. I've got pictures of it. It says Pepsi Coliseum. Mm-hmm. That sign has been long since changed. So anyway.
Sure.
Your intuition is staggering.
It is. I know.
Well, it's true what it is. So 1963, Halloween night. Let me paint a picture for you. At 11:06, the show is Holiday on Ice. They're on the last performance. They're playing a song called Mardi Gras, and it's actually a pinwheel type song, and they're finishing out. So the skaters have finished, and they're starting to skate toward the exits to go off stage. As they go. In the southeast corner, near the area of aisle 13, actually is a box seat, so it was like 13, 14, 15, 16. The whole area explodes violently. There's a huge piece of concrete, 20 feet, it flies in the air. Now, this is a piece of concrete that's 6 inches thick. It's probably 10 by 10.
Takes a lot of force.
A lot of force. And it gets airborne. Now, the Coliseum is about 45 or 50 feet, I think, in total. This thing gains 30 feet of height, so it's incredible.
What caused the explosion?
I'm glad you asked that because it was odd. There was a concession stand right underneath that area, and every concession stand to the left of the concession stand had a storage room. Well, what happened was they had some LP tanks that were used to fire up the popcorn makers that were stored, these tanks. Now, these weren't connected to the popcorn makers in the stand, but they were stored in there. And these were huge tanks. These aren't like the ones you have in the barbecue grill. These are large tanks. The ones in the barbecue grill are, I think, 30 pounds. These are like 90-pound cylinders.
Okay.
These were very old. They were rusted, and the cylinder compromised and began to leak. So the gas leaked through the entire performance. It went out into the concession stand and found the popcorn popper that had an element. Boom. That's all it took was the ignition source. We in the fire department used to teach about the fire triangle. Okay, you need 3 things to make a fire. We now call it a tetrahedron. But you need a fuel, you need a ignition source, and you need oxygen. Well, they had plenty of oxygen. The fuel was obviously the gas, and the ignition source was the popcorn popper.
Okay.
So that's what happened. Now, in the future, what will happen is when they go through the investigation, they'll end up charging the head of the fairgrounds, even the fire chief of IFD. And people always ask me, why did the fire chief get nailed? Every fire chief in the state of Indiana is a deputy fire marshal. Okay, as a fire chief, when I retired, I was considered a deputy fire marshal. I had all the rights and responsibilities. Well, you get a lot of rights for that, but you get a lot of responsibilities too. Had he done the proper fire inspections, those tanks would have been discovered, and they weren't the type of tanks to store inside. They did not have safety valves. Those should have been stored outside, and they should have been cascaded, which in other words, they put 3 together, hook them together, and they use them to fill smaller tanks that are safer tanks.
Yeah.
These were not done that way. So unfortunately, they were inside when they weren't supposed to be.
So there wasn't proper oversight.
There wasn't.
Of these.
No.
I hope I'm not getting ahead.
No, please go ahead. Yeah.
Coming from a situation like this, did that change what the standards were in the enforcement?
Oh, God, yes. Unfortunately, being a fire chief, I can tell you, most everything's proactive. You take the Coconut Grove fire, and I don't want to turn this into...
You mean reactive?
Reactive, yes. Well, yeah, they're very rarely proactive because of the fact that, we don't usually act until something happens. It's like, oh, my God, we got to change this. The Coconut Grove fire brought in load capacity and load anticipation into. So we would go into a structure and say, okay, this is a safe load, because we would figure that by means of egress, how big the exits were. We'd measure the doors, understand how many people we could pass through, and we had formulas that tell us how many people would pass through that door per minute to be able to evacuate. And I went through great classes while I was in fire prevention over this, but every fire, every disaster leads to new regulations. The MGM fire in Las Vegas, that brought in all kinds of new high-rise walls, on high-rise coverage, protection. It's incredible. Unfortunately, we learn by failure. That seems to be the key in the United States. So this was a learning it told us that, compressed gases should not be stored in certain places. And the problem is in this particular case, they knew that beforehand. Had the proper, again, just like Eric pointed out, had the proper procedures been maintained, it wouldn't be a problem. At the end of the day, who's responsible for that? Well, that's the fire marshal. If it's a fire-related issue or safety-related issue, because we didn't have a safety officer back then, it was all fire department. So the fire marshal got nailed for this, and
I was
in
just gonna
complacency.
ask that if he got in trouble.
Yep, he was part of the litigation that involved the fire marshal, the mayor, because people, in the end of the day, one thing I was always told when I made fire chief, the buck stops with me.
Yeah.
I if something rolls out, something's done wrong, it doesn't matter if it's done by the youngest member of the fire department. The bottom line is the guy that's going to pay the price will be me. So it's my job to oversee everything that happens within my department. Unfortunately here, it was a sad situation because these tanks were actually moved around several times in the fairgrounds. They were trying to find a place to stick them, and they got stuck in there.
Oh, man.
And this is what caused this. And it was horrible. And the first explosion raised the concrete and blew everybody that was in that box airborne.
Oh, my God.
Shortly thereafter, a load-bearing wall underneath that collapsed. Okay, so that brought the box into the second level, which is the area of the snack booth and all the storage. And the second explosion went, and that blast was a smaller explosion, but it created a fireball that raised 40 feet. Now, bear in mind, 50 or 60 is the roof of the Coliseum. This thing's up, almost top of the Coliseum. It's a fire column. Scary as hell. That night, 81 people died. 400 were injured. Tonight, we're going to take a quick break because I have a special guest with me, a gentleman named Wayne Cadwell. Wayne is a fabulous individual. He is a past secretary of my lodge for over 22 years. And he was there that fateful night on Halloween. He was sitting opposite the southeast corner, and he was there when everything came down. So we're going to go over to my interview with Wayne, and we're going to stop right here and go to it. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we have a special guest with us, someone who's very near to my heart, Wayne Cadwell. Say hi, Wayne.
Hi. Hi, Chris.
Glad you could be with us. I really am. Wayne, it means a lot to me. After my father's death, Wayne became my secondary father, and he's helped me out in many things Masonically over the years and kind of watched over me. Wayne was our lodge secretary. How many years were you secretary, Wayne?
26 years.
26 years, and that's a long time to be sentenced to that position. But I was assistant secretary for Wayne, and it was fantastic. And one night, I guess after lodge or during lodge, he confided in me that he was there the night of the Coliseum explosion, and that was on Halloween night in '63, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And where were you sitting? Were you on the other side of the stadium?
Yes, I was directly across from that explosion. I mean, same height, everything.
Wow.
I mean, that could have been me.
Oh,
when I get to thinking about that, I was on the other side watching that all happen.
Wow.
I mean, it was a first-hand experience.
Now, was it just you and your wife that was there that night?
That is correct, yeah. We were just sitting there watching the Holiday on Ice skating exhibition, and that was 61 years ago, and I'll try to remember as much as I can.
Okay. Well, and if you can't, that's okay. I mean, whatever you can remember. I know it has to be pretty horrific.
Yeah, well, it was. It was when you watch something like that happen, you're sitting there and you think, is this really happening?
Sure.
And all of a sudden, when I seen that stand come up in the air about 40 feet high, and all the people were flying out of the seats onto the ice, and and then the flames were shooting right straight up in the air from the propane explosion. And you're sitting there and you thought, "Am I really seeing this?"
Yeah, yeah. Was it like a ball of fire, or was it just more debris in the air?
Oh yeah, it was a extreme ball of fire, and you could feel the heat from it. It was that bad.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
It went clear. Did it go clear to the ceiling of the Coliseum?
It got up pretty close, I'm telling you, but it didn't last a long time because it burned out. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Either that or they got it extinguished quicker than I thought, but it was going pretty good. And then, of course, when that happened, I was trying to get my wife out. She was collapsing on me because she watched all the bodies flying through the air and hitting the ice and killing them. And she was collapsing. I was trying to get her, and I wanted to go down and help everybody.
Yes.
But I had to get her out of there, and that's what happened mostly.
Wow. Well, now the night I know that research has found that it came from a concession stand leaking gas in, and a popcorn heater element caused it to ignite. Initially, after the explosion, I know there's always, in every incident, there's always that level of confusion, to what happened, what went on, people trying to leave, people trying to help. And, my understanding is that it actually took out several chunks of concrete and laid them on the ice.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what I'm trying to tell you is that whole level where the seats were sitting,
yes,
it lifted that whole piece of concrete out of its position and threw it out onto the ice.
And we're not talking anything small. We're talking a big section. This is like a 40 by 40 section.
Yeah, every bit of it. And the people in the front row didn't have a chance. It killed them immediately. Wow. It had to.
Well, yeah.
It come right over on them.
Wow.
And it said, about 45 people died right there immediately.
Yes.
And that's what I remember that they was talking about. And,
wow. And
more died later at the hospital. Of course, complications.
Sure, from their injuries. Did the police or anybody interview at the time to try to ascertain what was going on or what you saw?
No, they never did interview me. We got up from our seats and then headed for the exit. Mm-hmm. And as we was trying to get out, all the police and ambulances and everybody was coming in.
Yes.
To get everything under control. But there for a few seconds, you sat there and watched it, and nothing. It was just quiet after the explosion.
Silent, huh?
And for a few seconds, no one cried out. Then all of a sudden, boom! Everything, it all happened. You realize something bad happened. That's all.
Were you about trampled trying to get out?
Not really. That was amazing. I was sitting there thinking about that too. I finally. The reason why is my wife kept collapsing on me. And I had to keep picking her up. And I said, "Come on, we got to get out of here." Yeah. And everybody else got out ahead of me. Luckily.
Well, that might have been a good thing. That may have been what saved you from getting trampled. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh yeah.
I got to thinking about that. I said, that's exactly the way I've seen it. So.
Well, and those. I know from being in the fire industry as a fire chief that, back then we didn't have coordinated command. It's what we call IC command now. And I remember, and hopefully we're going to be interviewing some of the firemen that were there, and there wasn't a real structured type of response. We do things now where we look, when they build a building, we say, okay, what if this building explodes? What if this building catches fire? How do we handle it? We didn't do any of that back then. And my understanding was there was some ambulances there that were being provided for the ice skating rink itself. I don't know if they were hired by Holiday on Ice or if they were hired by who they were hired by, but they were there with police for that event, and that helped immensely having them on scene. But even then, back in the 60s, radios weren't what they used to be, and they had a heck of a time they actually had to get to a phone, I guess, and actually call it in.
Yeah. So, I think I got to thinking there was probably only 2 ambulances there at the time. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a lot of police. I mean, there was maybe 10 that I could actually see at any given time.
Yeah.
And, they were just scattered out through the building except when that happened. And anybody who was down by the concession stand didn't make it. That's all I can tell you.
Wow. Yeah, oddly enough, and I and Wayne are both Masons, and I'm a Shriner, and I always work the circuses, and I worked with the Firemen's Club. We provided medical for the circuses when they were held at the Coliseum, and oddly enough, our first aid room was right across the hall from the concession stand that had the explosion.
Yeah.
I never knew that, and then one day, one of the gentlemen came in and said, just so everybody knows, he said, if it may come up, he said something was said on the news, and he said, but this is the concession stand that blew up in the 60s. Well, that's the first time I'd honestly heard of it. I had not heard of it.
Yeah.
I didn't know about it. And one of the guys brought in some pictures that he had and showed them to me. And he said, yeah, this whole section blew out onto the ice. And we went up after it was over with, and we looked at the concrete, and you could see where the concrete had been repaired from where that explosion had occurred. And
there was a big section, I'm telling you.
Wow.
And all that was flying through the air out onto the ice with the people.
Now
that was the sad part.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the scary part is watching people that are dazed out on the ice trying to get up.
Sure.
And move around. I remember that they were dazed and then fell down and trying to get up, and nobody. And people jumped out there was trying to help them as much as you could. That's what I remember. Then I finally got my wife and me out of the accident. We finally got out to the car and got away.
Yeah, and then did you just went straight on home after that, right?
Yeah. We didn't have any trauma from it. I never did. I just, but for her, it was something she couldn't hardly understand and take.
Well, yeah, and that was my next question. When you got home, how did you feel, and how? I mean, some people can handle things better than others. I mean, we found that out on scenes over the years, and it just is what it is. Looking back on that, is there any specific memory that you have that particularly stands out?
No, it was all bad, but
sure.
My wife, I had to take her home and just put her to bed, give her some aspirin or whatever it was back then.
Yes.
And give her some medicine, let her go to bed and relax. And then I got to talking to people in the family because they was calling me, wanting to know if we was okay from the explosion. They heard it. And I said, yeah, I had to reassure everybody. And that's about it. I could probably handle more of that than she could. And
yeah.
That's just the way you and I both could. We could handle a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
As you well know, so.
Yeah, it makes it, It unfortunately, you'll see some of these things in life. It's just unfortunate that, we do. And people ask me about 9/11 and other things, and I'm always very careful because, those are things that'll stay with you, and you don't, and that's why I didn't want you discussing any more than what you felt comfortable discussing, because sometimes, it's a little painful, but certainly. Now, was there anybody that you knew that was killed in the explosion?
That's a good question, and I don't think that ever come up. Now, I was kind of researching before I talked to you.
Yeah.
And I seen the only thing I was going to tell you is, if you look on Google, it shows a picture of them getting a boy out of that explosion hole.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's the guy you'd like to really interview.
Oh, that's the thing.
He fell right through there, and he was a young. He looked like he was about maybe 12, 13-year-old boy, and they handed him up out of there. He survived that.
I saw that picture. Yeah.
I don't know how he did it, but he did survive it, and that didn't. Oh man.
Well, I looked through some of the photos, and the bad thing is, and this is, people don't realize, even though we're in parapsychology, and when we go out to a location, they call and they say, hey, this place is haunted, the first thing we do is put our research manager looking up to see if there's a reason possibly it might be. And, of course, what we find may not always be the reason if it's haunted. Sometimes I always tell people, I have a saying that all old buildings are creepy, but they're not haunted. you can't always go on that. And there's something called confirmation bias, and sometimes we get involved in something where the history goes, the explosion, this must be where the ghost came from. Well, not necessarily. It can be a lot of different things that can cause that, but research is a big thing. And when you delve in, the facts that come, and we've had instances at certain locations where we were told stories about, why they thought it was haunted and these different people that had died and different things that happened, and then we research it and find out that none of that's true. We had one in particular, we were told a minister was having an affair with several of his congregation and hung himself in this hotel. Our research manager found out he died a perfectly happy death in his bed, like 30 years after the point he was supposed to commit suicide. And he did it, and he died in Michigan. I mean, so it doesn't always, checking the facts makes a difference. The problem I have with most of these photos, and I did, my research manager's done most of it, but I did a little this morning. And the Indianapolis Star has a collection of photos, and so does the Indianapolis Encyclopedia. And they got some great shots. I mean, they really do for the time. But the problem is the byline. It'll tell you that, it's an AP wire photographer that made the photo, but it doesn't tell you there's one photo, I think, where it identifies the coroner, and another one that identifies, like, the deputy police commissioner, police chief. But other than that, it says man pulling child from, and that's what it said, fireman pulling child and out of rubble, and it just doesn't say. And I'm real surprised the news or somebody at one of the anniversary points didn't go back and try to find people. The task would be very daunting. A lot of times we can go on social media and we hit a few of the sites and say, hey, is anybody that were in any of these photos from the Coliseum explosion available? We would love to talk to you about the explosion. Sometimes we can get people back that way. It actually, oddly enough, it had nothing to do with a ghost or haunting. We were researching something, and I brought up the TP restaurant. And the guy told me, he said, well, the TP that went on top, the dome that was, in the building? I said, yeah. He said, when they tore the building down, he said, my uncle kept it. It's in his garage. We found the TP top by accident. We were doing a research on another subject, and the guy says, my uncle still owns that to this day. Loves that thing. Said it had the best food ever. And of course, I remember eating the TP when I was down at the corner. And, but as you go back, the more time, like you said, 60-some years has gone by. And over the period of time, a lot of things get lost fast. And I think it was the same year that you shared this with me was the year that, we were out at the fair, and someone had mentioned that, and I think the firefighter's name is Joe. I'm still researching. But he told me, he said, I was on the run. He said, I was out of Station 13, and he said, I got the run. And he was telling me what all had happened and how, they brought in different resources. He said, we didn't have any organization. He said, we never, we didn't have this ever happen. And he was telling me how they were trying, they were moving stuff with pickup trucks. A lot of firemen responded in with their own pickups. And he was telling me about this. He worked there for about 18 hours after the initial explosion. And, a lot of things, of course, a lot of people, unfortunately, have passed on that were there. I know we looked up one particular newscaster who had told his story, and he's passed. It's hard to find people. I would love to run into that boy or be able to talk to him, and certainly it'd be be interesting to see. And I'm hoping to get a couple more firemen. So, well, Wayne, is there anything else you can think of you'd like to share with us about that night?
Not really. It never really extremely bothered me, except that I seen a horrific scene, and that's about it.
Oh God, yeah.
That's about all I can tell you, really.
Well, that's
I'm
a
just
lot.
glad they got everything under control now.
Yeah,
a lot better response. And all that.
Yeah. I mean, we still have problems. I was watching on the news about the response to North Carolina, and one, I thank God I didn't have to be one anymore. I'm retired. I don't have to run out there. But a lot of times, and I'm not defending anybody it's wrongdoing, but there's a lot of times where those responses, there's no book that covers everything in a response like that. Everyone's different. When you go out in a hurricane, the terrain becomes different, the hazards are different. You just don't know what you're going to deal with from day to day, and you have to kind of write the book as you go. And I think that was clearly what happened here. They had to write the response book as they went. So, well, Wayne, I want to thank you for giving us this interview and talking with us. We really do appreciate it, and I'll and I'm going to go ahead and sign us off. Hang on. Again, thank you, Wayne, for everything that you've told us. It's like, wow. I mean, this is I think one newscaster started an article that said, "I walked into a horror scene," and I mean, my God, this was incredible. Now I want to go over some accounts, and again, this builds up to why we're talking about curses and hauntings. The first account's by Joe Overson. Now, Joe passed away. He was in the Firemen's Club of the Mirage Shrine. I knew him for years. He was one of the first firemen on scene. In the modern age today, we have what we call ICS, Instant Command Systems. So when we come in, there's a process. Everybody knows what their jobs are. We set up command. The instant commander never deals with more than 5 people. And this came from an earlier program called Fire Scope. And he has people that handle logistics, people that handle triage, people that handle EMS, people that handle, operations. And so he kind of controls. It's a very orchestrated. This did not exist in 1963 on that Halloween night.
Right.
There were firemen that weren't far away. There were policemen that were stationed there. They were brought there because of the performance of Holiday on Ice, and they were working in that area, and they were assigned to it. But basically, let me take you back to 63. In 63, the fire department didn't have handheld radios. They were rare. Fire chief, assistant deputy chief might have one, but that's it. Every piece of radio was in an apparatus. So if you were driving an apparatus, you had control of the radio. Otherwise, it had to be phoned in. Police officers didn't have radios. If they were in their car, they had their equipment all their apparatus had radios, but otherwise they had to use the phone. Right. Phone was still the novel and most preferred means of communication. Okay, so when this happened, actually response times are really good, and at this point in time, I'm going to hopefully play the original audio from this incident through fire dispatch.
Coliseum of the Fairgrounds, an explosion, box 2137. Box 2137. KSA 9011-6. 14, squad 14 going on that run. Engine 14, squad 14 going on that run. KSA 9011-7. Fire department? Hello, who is this, Tommy? Yeah. Hey, Tommy, this will down like the Coliseum. There's been an explosion or something out here. Yeah, I did 2137 on it. Okay. You got a squad and stuff coming? Yeah, I got a squad coming. Okay. How much could you send it? Could you use another squad? I don't know how bad it is. I'm man weaker and ambulances too. How many, anything burning? Yeah, there's something burning down there. We haven't got to it yet. Okay, fine.
I want to thank Joe Krebsbach, retired deputy chief, IFD, who provided me some of this material that we got to listen to tonight from Annapolis Fire Department. Again, thank you very much, Joe. So we've established that, radio wasn't the standard optimal communication item.
Right.
So there was 2 off-duty firemen that was there the night of the explosion. And they got on phones and called it in. The first one requested ambulances. At the time, most ambulances in 63 ran from hospitals. They weren't part of the fire system. EMS hadn't been integrated. So the Wishart was that time it was the Indianapolis Hospital. They had 3 ambulances. That was the 3 they sent. That was it.
Were there any that were actually on site at the time?
There were not. There was supposed to be, but there were not. And I had conflicting stories because they show pictures that show 2 ambulances. Those are not those are not on scene until after the fact.
Gotcha.
So none were there. Now, there was 2 off-duty firemen. They started trying to help. Bear in mind, this slab that came down in several pieces trapped people underneath it. So some people were alive when transported. But back then, that's before 75 was the EMS Act that brought in the EMS Commission. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we had rules and regulations how people transport. Prior to that, it was a meat wagon. That's what we used to call them. It was load and go, drive as fast as you can before they die, and try to get them to the hospital to try to let them save them.
Wow.
So they got no first aid. They got a guy in a white pants, a white basically jacket that threw them in as best they could, scooped them up, got them in the rig, and drove as fast as they could before they died to get them to the hospital. So,
Put them in the back of the pickup truck.
Yep. It's about pretty much same. I mean, in the difference between an ambulance and a hearse was the styling package when that Cadillac rolled off the line in Detroit. And to this day, people collect them. And I've been looking for an ambulance for years. Most hearses of that type you can convert back because you just have to have the glass. The glass had a red square put on with some indiscretional lines. It's not hard to convert one. The actual gurney contraption, which was called a Taurus horn, it was like a bull's horn that went into, is the same thing that would pull out and you could put the actual casket mounting system in.
Wow.
So it was multi-use. A lot of funeral homes ran one particular hearse that was their ambulance and had a multi-grasping system because they couldn't afford, no place around there had ambulances, so the funeral home director would be their ambulance and would be called out. Kind of scary getting picked up by the funeral home, but that was common in the 60s.
We're here.
Yeah, exactly.
But
so
if there were
catch you
81
coming and
people,
going.
We're here for the body.
Yeah.
If there were 81 people that died and 400 plus that were injured,
Yes.
what kind of response time would there have been?
Actually, believe it or not, it was incredible. And I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I did research it. And it was like 7 minutes after it happened, the first engine was on scene. It turned out the engine wasn't far from the Coliseum.
So how far was the hospital from the Coliseum?
Okay, the Coliseum at that point.
You can't even get 7 minutes now in some places.
No. We found a new thing in this modern age. It's called tear the roads up and see what they do next. Yeah. Anyway, and, not that I'm throwing off on the current mayor at all. Anyway, but yeah, I've seen roads that have been mined by the military look better than some of ours. But anyway, saying that, those probably 4 minutes to Wishart, which was Indiana General at the time. The ambulances, there was one ambulance. Those came later. The fire engine was on the station down 38th Street, and I actually worked for 8 ambulance. I ran a supervisor for that area, and there was a station there. And we ran relief for them because, again, IFD for years and years and years didn't run its own ambulance service. They always used somebody else. Wishart and in some areas AID. As it came along, eventually IEMS, which Tim, our tech manager, works for, was developed, and that became their medical wing. But before years, it was very if you were a fireman, you were a fireman. You fought fires. You were taught first aid, Red Cross first aid. That's all. Your job was keep them alive to the ambulance crew got out there, and then your hands were washed clean.
Right.
EMS, I remember I came in the fire service after I left the service, and it was very rough because it wasn't accepted, really, to have. And Warren Township was one of the first places to put rigs in. I worked for a guy named Resenauer, who was the EMS chief. We were like plague victims to the rest of the crew. They were old-timers that just wanted to fight fire. If they saw blood, they weren't anywhere near it. Oh, my God, it's all contains AIDS. We don't want anywhere near it. No, I'm not wearing rubber gloves. It was one of those kind of things. Same guys died of black lung because they didn't wear packs during car fires and dumpster fires. But anyway, it was the norm of that time. So anyway, within 7 minutes, first engine was on scene. That's a good run response nowadays. Because nowadays our average is 7 minutes in a standard urban or rural, or I'm sorry, not rural, but a city or suburban area. So for that area, damn good. The guys got it started. It wasn't for the 2 off-duty firemen. It wouldn't come out that good. The police officers did the same. They called it in. There was police officers on the scene. So within 3 minutes, they had police officers there. But we're talking a handful. Mm-hmm. Okay, you've got a panicked crowd that doesn't know what the hell to do. As we learned from Wayne's testimony, his wife kept passing out. People were going through psychological shock. Mm-hmm. It was horrible. I mean, there was ice. There was body parts all over the stadium. And
can't even imagine.
Oh, yeah. It was horrible. In my upcoming book, I won't have the pictures because I have some that came from the fire marshal's office and the fire photographer of IFD, and they're very graphic. They can't be released to the public.
Goodness.
But, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people died. And there was one gentleman who was pulling out a child out of the hole that was, and that was actually on several of the newspapers. And that actual boy was interviewed 30 years later, and they talked to him about it, and his sister. And, that night was just an incredible night. There was a lot of luck in that respect. Mm-hmm. But they couldn't move the concrete. They had to actually call in cranes and heavy equipment. So this thing lasted away into the next day. And, when they figured out the best morgue they had was the ice. Mm-hmm. Because there wasn't anybody around. Now, the late, great Michael St. Pierre, who's a brother Mason, brother Noble Shriner, him and I talked about this. He got called down there, and he told me this story. And he's gone now, and I hate it. Michael was a great, great family monarch. Now, I played in a band with his brother Steve, both fantastic guys, probably the best of the family they'll ever be. And he told me, he said, if you know me, you know that's a little dig. But anyway, he told me, he said, I'll tell you. He said, we got called down there. I was young, and my dad was running it, everything. And he said, we got called down there. He said, to pick up bodies. And he said they were transporting some in pickup trucks and everything else. Right. But that was not uncommon. So, major loss of life here, okay? Yeah. And we're talking 93 years from the explosion. Now, one thing I want to point out about the boiler explosion was, it wasn't the fairgrounds they have now. The fairgrounds now is bordered by 38th Street, Fall Creek. I'm trying to think what street is on the north. But it's way north. At the time, the fairgrounds in the 1800s was at actually 13th in Alabama. Totally different. That was the Heron Morton place now. So it's a totally different area. So that comes into account when we start talking about the curse. Not the same area. Okay, so anyway, the long story short is, we got these blasts. So now, okay, let's fast forward past that. And, I want to get past Joe. Well, let me tell you, I started with Joe, and I'm sorry, I got distracted. Joe told me that when he got there, when they come in, he was second engine in. Okay, in the fire service, we have this thing about being first engine in. I remember my car that I had, which is car 42 for a while, had a bumper sticker that says, if you're reading this, you're second in. And it was a big thing being first in on the scene. If you're not first,
you're last.
Yeah, that's right. If you're not first, you're last. That's what we always laughed about that. So first engine always took command until an officer arrived. And when I would roll up as an officer, I would immediately notify command that, I was in command and I had control. And, then anybody outright me would come in and automatically override me and said, this is a district such as I now have command of the incident. And, that rolled over. Like Joe told me, he said it was a mess. He said people had never dealt with something on this scale. There was no triage. There was no, if you were living, we got you out of there. We got you a hospital. It might be in the back of a pickup. It might be an ambulance. More people were transported by pickup trucks than by the ambulances. The ambulance crews were left on scene, and they farmed all the equipment out of the ambulances, all the bandages, everything they could. But there was only one ambulance really used for transport. The other two stayed there, and there's pictures of those two, and I hope we'll be able to put those up, showing the two ambulances on scene just sitting on the ice. So, anyway, there was two other firemen that both have now passed. And I've talked to them in the past. We've talked about this whole incident. So, anyway, so now we have this, okay? Now we fast forward another 48 years, and we come into the collapse on August the 13th, 2011, of the stage. The night before that, I was there at the fairgrounds. The night before this happened, I was there. I was cooking at the VCM booth. I ran the grill and the fryer. That was jobs nobody wanted. I always found if you took the jobs nobody wanted, nobody bothered you because nobody wanted to walk back around all that heat. I'd sit back there. The nice thing was...
Well, and if you bother you, you're next.
Yeah, exactly. You got to take over the fryer. It's like I always told people, if you got instructions for me, you want to do this. If not, go back to wherever the hell you came from. Anyway, so I'm working the grill and the fryer. And there's another couple guys back here with me. Actually, there's 2 guys back here with me. And Ed Adams was one of the guys. He ran the prep table. So, you know, it was stormy that night. And it's the night before. It was stormy. There was rain predicted. We got out of there that night and went back home. The next night, we were on shift. Now, we always took the afternoon and evening runs of these. Why we didn't take the morning? Because those were the older people. And these guys were hard to get along with. Yes, they were brothers, but they were assholes. They were hard to get along with. And they were a pain in the ass, and they didn't like things certain ways. So we always would work the afternoon, evening shifts. We didn't have to deal with them. Most of those are dead now. But anyway, and I say that with all the due respect of a brother. But anyway, oh my God, they were a pain. And they would hide biscuits because they wanted to take them home with them. So our thing was to find their hiding spot, because they would hide them for a couple of days and then take them all home. We'd get them out, make biscuits and gravy and everything, which we didn't normally serve to the public. So anyway, long story short, the next night, I'm not there. But the nice thing with the VCM was, at the end of the night, we'd close all the curtains, close all the sides, break out the alcohol. We'd all sit there and drink and enjoy. We'd leave about 1 a.m. and head back home. So the next night, Sugarland is getting ready to perform. It's a sold-out conference. They actually are
Concert.
Thank you, concert. They actually put these blinders up all the way around, because the stage was in the track area of the inner area of the fairgrounds. So they put these blinder mats up so you couldn't get in and see anything from the sides. Now, we were located catty corner from the gazebo, right there at the entrance to the Midway. And the VCM booth used to run there. Next to us was the smoked turkey leg booth. And we actually had a deal to swap meals with them. But it was great. And you could go between the 2 buildings. You could see the fence to see the stage. So they put these up so we couldn't see them. And so anyway, Sugarland hadn't performed yet. Okay, when this happened, this happened at a point where an opening act, and I am sorry, I don't have that. I actually researched it, but an individual came out and performed. She had just went back off stage. They're waiting for Sugarland to come on. Now, without getting deep into this whole mess, and this was a mess, they originally did not realize the weather had turned this way. The last report they had said that the weather was okay, and they thought they had it good to about 9:30. The weather changed drastically. The actual fire chief, who was acting as fire marshal on the scene, got with them and said, hey, we need to shut this down. You need to cancel the concert. Sugarland was still in their bus. They hadn't even got on stage yet. And they started to go to the stage. It was too late. The wind caught it. Because of the structural defects and improper rigging, it collapsed the stage in on the folks. There were 7 killed and 58 injured. So,
oh, man.
Okay, and remember that happened on August 13th, 2011. So anyway, let's add this all up together. The old guy that told me about the curse was a gentleman who worked maintenance for the fairgrounds. And he knew a lot of things. Back when I was a kid, there was a manure processing plant they don't want to talk about. It was between a lot of the livestock barns, and they would burn this manure to the point that they could use it for fertilizer. And it wasn't very hot, and they would take all this shit, proverbially, no joke, back to this bar area. He told me he used to run that, and
I bet
great
that
guy.
Smelled wonderful.
Oh God, yes. My dad would always parade us through that alley to get to one of the other barns, and oh my God, you always had to walk by the pile of shit and all the smell. It was this huge smokestack. I don't think it's there, but it might be. I don't recall.
That's
but anyway,
some serious shit.
That's some serious shit. No, so anyway, I'm not going to give you I'm not giving out the people who give me this because out of respect, but other than the ones that have passed. But anyway, he told me, he said, there's a curse. And I said, really? He says, yeah, it deals with all 3 incidents that happened. I said, okay, well, enlighten me. He says, well, okay, first of all, the boiler that exploded was 13 horsepower. I said, okay. He says, so, he says the explosion, 63, happened in aisle 13. He says, and the stage collapsed happened on the 13th. And he said,
it wasn't a Friday, was it?
No, but it was
I
all
was curious about that as well.
And so I think this guy's into numerology, and I look at him, I go, okay, and I'm thinking, God, this is a stretch. And so when I started to do research, we said last episode about the fact that research sometimes uncovers inconsistent evidence. Well, I did the research, come to find out the horsepower of the engine that blew up was 25 horsepower, not 13. Now, I will say that the stage collapse did happen on August 13th, and it was The explosion happened in the vicinity, including aisle 13, 14, 15, and 16 of the boxed area of the cathedral. So, is there a curse? I really don't think so. I think that, a lot of what we got here is someone trying to connect the points. Okay, is there been some bad things happen to fairgrounds? Yeah. I think there's been some horrible things. Now, I'll tell you, as a kid, every fair, we went to the state fair. My dad was a big thing about going to the state fair.
August 13th, 2011 was a Saturday.
Oh, Saturday. Okay, so we know it wasn't a Friday. Good. I seen you looking. I figured since Heather was holding Zari, I figured you were looking. So, yeah, I knew it wasn't a Friday. I had a feeling. And the old timer that told me this was a good guy, and he really believed it. But I honestly, as a parapsychologist, amateur at that, no, it is not a curse. I really don't think it is. Now, do we have ghosts? Yeah, I think there's a possibility. Okay, so, ghosts, totally different issue. Okay, now, I knew a lot of folks working at the fairgrounds over the years. They hired people when I was a kid growing up in junior high and high school that would turn around and would work the trains. Now, they had these monorails, and there were carts you ride on that are pulled by large tractors. Tractors are provided by Reynolds Farm Equipment, and that's the last commercial you get unless you pay us. Reynolds Farm Equipment in Fishers, Indiana. Anyway, so, yeah, they would pull these around. Back then, I don't know if it was Reynolds. I'm assuming it was. But they would narrate, and they were kind of like a Disney tour guide, and they would ride in the middle, and you'd take them as a quarter to go around. Once you got on, it was a quarter to ride until you get off. So anyway, I knew a lot of people worked there. I knew people in 4-H and FFA that would display livestock. So anyway, long time ago, when I was still pretty young, I talked to a lot of the guys that had livestock in the barns. Now, they lived in the barns with the livestock to make sure nobody bothered them or, took them. So nowadays, they live pretty much in the stall next to all the stalls with their animals. But back then, the barns were different. They were built with a second level that was on the side wing, especially the sheep barn, the swine barn. And they go up there and sleep. Well, as I was telling everybody before the show started, there was these two kids one time I saw that had this worked out. They bought a rubber spider, good-sized one, and they put it on fishing wire, and they cast it down across two beams so it would come down right in the main pathways between the pigs. And they'd sit up there and run this down. Every time they see a woman walk through, they'd run it down to see if she'd scream. And these guys had it good. I mean, they were just having a good time with that rubber spider. So anyway, I had to laugh about it. But anyway, I knew a lot of those guys. And they told me, they said, a lot of the teenagers said, when we get together, we'd find some other farmer's daughter. And we get together and we might go over the Coliseum. Because Coliseum was left open all night long, same as the barns. Oh. And people would get up all night long to go to the bathroom, that kind of thing. They had to go downstairs. There was only one bath. It may have had more than one stall, but it was one bath. And they had to, that's where they went to. And my understanding back then, they even had showers and everything down there. But they would meet and hide over in the Coliseum. And, to date myself, we called it necking back then. We go over there to find a spot to neck in. Okay, so they get over in the Coliseum, and that's where they would hide. And, I got stories about them seeing other people. And they said, we almost got caught. But then when I tried to find the people that caught us, they weren't there. And they said we would hear people yell and people ask for help, and we couldn't see them. He said we just thought it was other people that were there with livestock. He said, but we were the only ones in the Coliseum. He said the lights were very dim, if not off at all. And back then, you could walk in the side doors, which were ramps that went down where they brought the livestock in for judging. Sure. And he said, and there was a ring on the outside that ran around the casino, around the Coliseum that had all the different. The snack stands and all that. And there was all tons of places to hide. So anyway, that was the occurrence. They told me they'd seen people in different manners of dress. Back then, kids don't really pay a lot of mind to that. But over the years, go ahead. Yeah.
No?
Oh, I thought you were.
I'm good.
Okay.
No?
Over the years, I ended up spending a lot more time there because I became a Shriner. And we had the Shrine Circus. We had the fairgrounds with the VCM booth. But the Shrine Circus was held in the Coliseum.
Right.
We'd have a shrine troupe outside set up that would come in and perform. And there were several of these ramps I was talking about that they would bring animals in and out of all the time. And it was always kind of a fun thing to be there. Now, the Firemen's Club provided EMS for the entire event. Police Club provided security. Everybody else either ran booths selling toys. There was a lot of things that went on, okay? And we always did this on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It was usually held in February. You sometimes be horrible weather. And we'd go out to this thing, and we always had a hospitality suite across. I can say this now because we don't do the circus anymore. But across the street, I think it was at the dairy building, that's where the Divan had its bar. And we had a bar there we could drink at. And so you had two, on Thursday and Friday, you had two different shows. The morning show was for kids. And they brought in school kids and paid for their fees to come in free to see this. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, there's a wonderful Shriner. His name is Luke Whitehouse, who does, his son and I, Scott Whitehouse, went to school together. But Luke is a fan. He's probably my epitome of Shriners. And his heart truly is there. And he always said, if they don't see us, they won't want to be like us. And so the key thing is being seen. And so to inspire children to be like us and support the Shrine Hospitals. And so we would go back and forth. We always wore fezzes. And I worked with the Firemen's Club, so I provided EMS. So anyway, the Thursday, Friday was pretty easy. And then Saturday you had 3 showings. Sunday was the worst. Everybody tried not to get the last showing on Sunday because first showing wasn't bad. If you were on the last showing, you were required to help tear down.
Oh, goodness.
So they had all these wood, little makeup stands that sold, they sold many kids' fezzes, and they sold toys, and then, and there was a couple, and they were never married till the day they died, and I think the absolute word of them, they both have passed, and then there was a third one that helped them, and her husband was in the 101st Airborne at the invasion of Normandy. I mean, these were some fantastic individuals. They ran the toy supply, and they supplied the toys for all the booths. And John, who was one of the gentlemen, told me, he said, and him and Ruthie told me one night that they'd seen some people leaving in 1950s garb or garments. And he said, they were there, but they weren't there. I said, what do you mean? He said, you could see through them.
Oh, wow.
He said they weren't there. Because that night, he had to make an accounting of everything. He had to go to every booth and pull every bit of toys out. He had a room in the back. I don't remember what room it was. The clowns had a room. They had a room. We had a room. The fire department did. And, we had, it was a giant, pitch-in supper. You go in, there's 15 crock pots in there. You could eat, like a king. Right. Everybody brought a crock pot in. And so the police had a room and whatnot. The police hung out in our room because they didn't have food. But anyway, he told me, he said, when it got late, we started tearing down. There wasn't much of us around. He said, you could see things. You could hear things. And he swore, he says, I don't believe in ghosts, but this place is haunted. I'm telling you. So
was it around 11?
I'm going to say it's probably after then. But, yeah, make you wonder a little bit if their numerology comes back into effect. But, yeah, no, I'm figuring this is around midnight. These shows, and nobody, I'm sure everybody's been to a circus, at least I hope at least once. Everybody always asks me, well, you got to see a lot of circuses. No, I didn't. After the first one, I stayed in the damn day room and ate.
Ate.
Seen one, seen them all. Yeah, I mean, there was a few acts I might leave the room and come up for when they came on.
Eat like a king.
Eat like a king, yeah. I mean, a circus was a good 2.5-hour experience.
Oh, yeah.
And they took a break in the middle. And I mean, my God, we'd have to be out on view when everybody passed out and came down and went through the, so we had to stand out in our fezzes. But, it was a mess. And I mean, and so after a while, we didn't go up to look at any of them. We were just there and waiting for a call if we needed it. So, but I think it's around midnight. And, I always made sure I did get scheduled for that. It sounds bad, but I didn't want to have to do teardown. And I got the hell out of there. But a couple of years, I did this for probably 15, 18 years. I got caught in one of them and had to do teardown. Now, I never saw anything, I'll be honest with you. But, I just helped take down, do a little bit here and there. And I was mainly on scene in case anybody got hurt during the teardown. They had somebody there.
Right.
But, in the end of it, it makes you wonder, and certainly there's great stories. I think I've told a couple about PETA and the day that the elephant fell and dropped some kids by accident. They weren't hurt, but oh my God, PETA's a pain in the ass. I'll say that. I don't care. Yeah, I have to tell this story now that I brought it up. I got in a lot of trouble with the potentate. During that year, the PETA came out throwing a fit about the elephant.
Right.
I got caught in the roundabouts area because, again, there's this hallway went all the way around the Coliseum. I was standing out there walking by myself. I went down to get something to eat and came back. And this guy called me from PETA. He's interviewing me. He said, he says, well, I want to know what happened to the elephant. Mm-hmm. Well, I might have had a little drink and was in one of those kind of fun moods. And I looked at him. I said, you see the barbecue grills outside? And he says, yeah. I said, we got to take care of that elephant. Yeah, I turned around and walked on.
Boy.
That didn't go well because we got put in the news that we had killed the elephant with barbecuing. And the potentate comes out and goes, what the hell were you thinking? Was your head up your ass? What the hell? I don't like PETA. I don't care. Oh, my God. I got my ass handed to me over that interview. And PETA sat there and, they actually they came out and protested us like 3 years in a row. Yeah, that potentate's passed now, but yeah, he was really unhappy at my performance, and I
can't
thought
imagine
it was
why.
kind of funny. Yeah, everybody else thought it was funny. The garbage crew thought it was funny, but yeah.
So was that on TV, the interview?
Yeah, but I've never been able to find it. But it was on TV.
Okay.
There was a crew.
Or maybe it was in a newspaper somewhere.
No.
They're eating the elephants.
Yeah, it might have been. I don't remember the newspaper. I remember it was either Channel 8 or Channel 6. It wasn't WTRV, because they usually came in. TTRV came in. It was 6 or 8. And this back for 8 bonded with 59 and became part. But they came in, and they were with the PETA crew as they walked around talking. And, they were talking to anybody who had a fez on.
Right.
And most guys were smart and said, no comment. I'm sorry, you'll have to talk to the potentate or something like that. Nope, they caught me on a transition. I was moving back into... Yeah, I was coming... I had just parked. I was running late. I came in through the back door, which was... We had certain doors we taped shut so we could open them from the outside. Otherwise, people get in. Yeah. They didn't want people to know about it. So I stuck in the back way because I had a marked vehicle. I could park back there. And I come soaring in, trying to get in before I got too late, because there was a certain guy that would end up being potentate, always ream my ass about being late. So I was cooking in there. I had to wait for Eddie, and we got in there late. I come in, so they just happened to catch me. It was probably 200 feet from the day room door is what they caught me at. And I gave the interview, and it is what it is. But, yeah, we've never found the interview. I don't know. I know, they always say...
Did they ever find the elephant?
Oh, yeah, the elephant was fine. It was out back, The funny thing was, what happened was they laid these heavy rubber mats down to cover all the cords for all the electrical and pyrotechnics and all that. The elephant just caught it. It was probably tired. I don't know how. I assume, and I believe to my heart, they were treated humanely. We hired the troops that performed. They weren't part of the shrine. I mean, none of those people were Shriners. They were troops. It was just a circus troupe that came in, and we would get different troops every year, but we got one that we kept for years and years and years because they did really well. And every troupe, what they do is they subcontract. A lot of people don't know this. They subcontract the individual acts. So the elephant act might come in as part of one troupe, next year be part of another troupe. And they had this baby elephant. And anytime you stood near it, because we would have to, the police would have to stand guard. They would put these rails up to stop traffic while they brought the things in. And this thing would go through, and it loved firemen. It's something about the red, which they say animals don't see color. But we were all dressed in red, and it would go over and send its trunk over. It would mess with you. And this one loved to put its snout up against my cheek like it was kissing me all the time. And, I always go, don't do that. Don't do that. I trunked out, and the handler always says, she likes you. I go, yeah, I'm sure she does. And, and it was always kind of a funny thing. I do miss the circuses. It was a load of work.
Maybe you smelled like peanuts.
I guess. but it certainly seemed to love me to no end. So
I used to love the circus.
Well, it's a thing that is,
that
even Bailey, Barnum and Bailey is gone. I mean, they're all gone. But we actually brought the circus back this last year.
Really?
We didn't get to participate. We were just there long enough to sell programs, and then it was a troupe that ran. I don't know what they made off of it, but the problem is people don't go to these things anymore. I hate to say it, but
sad.
It is. The Shrine developed something called a gun raffle, and by God, we got a shitload of people. We made a ton of money.
Oh, okay.
But you get a circus, and you'll end up in the red every time. And we stopped. It was a tradition that I hate. I worked there for years and years, and I got great pictures. I got the last picture of the last official full Shrine circus that they had at the Coliseum. Now, since then, I should point this out before we go any further. The Coliseum has been remodeled.
Okay.
It's not like it was. And of course, one thing that we always did, everybody in the firemen's group, when we got the new guys in the firemen's club, we would take them out and show them when they did lights up and everybody was leaving, where the concrete was replaced. You could see where the lines were poured. Now, the funny thing was, our first aid station was catty corner from the concession stand that had the explosion.
Oh, wow.
So every year, there'd always be some new guys. We bring in all these photos that I have now. of the fire marshal's office. That's Zara breathing into the mic. She's here to help. And it would show this concession stand where it exploded at. So, it is. So, anyway. Okay, so now let's talk about the police officers. These guys were there. Their job, they were stationed there to be able to, be there in case any problems happen. Mm-hmm. And there was always each show. I was told by two of them, and they both have passed as far as I know now. Mm-hmm. They were in the police club, that when they worked there part-time covering that area, that they had several times where they seen people in the crowd. Mm-hmm. And one of them swore up and down, it was in the same section at Blue, people sitting there. And he came up to tell them, which you had to walk up to go out into the stadium from this landing, to tell them they had to leave. The show was over. He says, like 2 hours later. He says, I saw them from the far end of the Coliseum on the opposite side. By the time it took me to get down to that ramp and or that stairs and up, they were gone.
Right.
And he said, that was some of the input we had from them.
Well, we were talking earlier today just even about residual hauntings.
Sure.
Something tragic like that happens.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I asked if it happened at 11, because wasn't that the time of the circus?
Explosion? Yeah, actually, the Holiday on Ice.
Oh, the Holiday on Ice.
I think that was 11:03. Let me look here and tell you for sure.
That's what I thought.
11:06. Okay. 11:06. So, that would have been about right, because most of the circuses ended between 9:45 and 10 o'clock. Usually by 10 o'clock they run over during the I don't know what they call it now. Back in the day we called it during emission or during
Intermission?
Intermission. I don't know what they call it now, but they would get out and they bring the camel and the elephant out and do rides. And they do some games.
Oh, okay.
Our clowns came out. The big thing every year was to get my children when they were young, was to get a program which had all the clowns' pictures in the back. You went around and all the clowns signed. Of course, Dad knew all the clowns because I drank with every one of them. So I'd go around and I'd hand it to one of them and go, look, I need a couple of these signed. Where are they at? And they'd be in the makeup room. I'd tell the kids, okay, you can't go here, but just wait here. I'll be back. I'd come back out with signatures, so it worked out pretty well. So, but, that's a good point. About 11 o'clock is when a lot of things tend to happen. So, anyway, long story short, there was a lot of people involved in a shrine situation when we were there for the circus. You had people selling programs, people in actually our police department, our police club also covered the actual cash box and the cash because everything was taken in and counted at the end of the night. So anyway, everybody had their jobs, but at the end of the night, a lot of the guys would come in and sell programs. They'd leave as soon as they were done. As soon as the show started, they were out of there. Fire and police were always the first in, last out. And so, as the evening drug along, we were the last ones to see things. Now, I never saw anything, but I was told by numerous individuals they saw people who weren't there. And so, anyway, long story short, I did actually reach out about 10 years ago to the director of the Coliseum at that time and said, hey, we've been told this. Is there any truth? Well, they emphatically denied it because it would have been bad for business in their mind. At that time, they had a hockey team that was there. I think it was the Indianapolis Fuel, and they were being there, or Indianapolis Ice.
The Fuel's there now.
Yeah, Fuel's there now. It was the Indianapolis Ice back then, and they did not want that put out. So, what I'm telling you again, I always say this, and it's kind of contradiction, but, this could be considered folklore. It could be a residual haunting, as Mia suggested. It could be a lot of different things, but we do believe there's a lot of things that are going on there. So, anyway, but
can we go investigate it?
I'd love to. I don't know if we can get in there. I will try that. It's something we may do in the future. You may be getting an episode where we actually went and investigated. It depends on who's there. Yeah, I mean, the school board is Fair Board is actually the big controlling entity there. And it depends on who's on it. If we can get the right people on it, yes, I don't think it'd be a problem. So, a couple of things I'll close with. The last one was from a guy that worked there. He was outside maintenance. This is after the fair. I'm going to say this is probably about October, November. And this is one of those things that, stay in my mind. He was a maintenance guy. He was driving around. And so you got to remember, the explosion happened when? Halloween. So About this time, it was cold. He was driving by. And if you drove between, the Coliseum was on his right. He's going toward Fall Creek. And there's a 2-lane divided with broken islands. The grandstand's on the left. As he passes the main entrance to the Coliseum, this is where it was redone, where the ticket booths are at, he sees people standing there. And they seem different. Like he said, he caught them quick out of a glance. But the one thing that stuck with him is they were in full winter coats. He said the problem was it was 92 degrees outside. And he said these people are in winter coats, and it looked like they were leaving the Coliseum. He said the other problem is it's 3 a.m. He turns around at the first opportunity to go back to see what's going on. When he goes back, all he can see is the lighted, he said because the night lighting they put on was just lit the ticket area. And I remember this, when you first went in, you had ticket booths on the outside that you could talk to people through the the mesh wiring there. And then when you went in, there was a little bit of area there. It was probably 15 foot before you went to the next set of doors that opened into the Coliseum. So like a vestibule, if you will. He said that was lit, the vestibule area was lit up, but there's nobody in it when you turn around. So he said, just so you know. Now, these people are all retired. They've long since left. These are all stories but here's the thing. I always tell, I don't have proof of any of these, but the people that related them to me believe them to be true 100%. And I believe that, anything of that kind of accident we found in the past tends to create ghosts. So I'm going to say...
major trauma.
Oh, yeah. And, I always tell people, I always look toward the Coliseum, because when we worked VCM during the fairgrounds, we get out of there sometimes 11, 12 o'clock after we sat down, had a little fellowship. And I'd always look across the way, because we were on the grandstand side. I'd look over to see if there was anything going on as we left, because we parked in the police fire lot, because I had to mark vehicles, and that's where we park at. So the one thing I'm going to say is, when you're at State Fair, you might just drift by the Coliseum. They leave it open so you can tour it. It now has elevators and it's totally differently laid out. But go over to the southeast corner late one night, see if you hear anything. Just a thought.
See anything.
Or see anything.
Or investigate it.
Yeah. Hopefully we can get in there. Okay, well, folks, that's all I have. Does anybody want to put anything with this? Nope. Okay. So this is the conclusion for tonight's episode, Ghost Ghost. We really, truly hope you enjoyed it. This episode, Ghost Ghost, written by myself and with help of Heather. It's now time for a Ghost Story of the Day with Heather Lawson.
This comes from Hoosier Folktales by Ronald L. Baker. It's victim's face pressed into wall. There is this huge house in Terre Haute which has a big stone wall going around it. There's an imprint of a face in this wall, and it is supposedly the face of the son of the man who owns this home. When he was 16 years old, his father bought him a new car, and he was out one night and had been drinking and going rather fast. And he started to turn into his driveway and hit the wall instead, and he was killed. And his body was thrown up against the wall, and this is the imprint in the face on the wall.
Thanks for listening to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air, or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd. All rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.